Oliver's sparkly jacket, a journey of courage and self-love in the face of bullying. The story begins with a bright pink, sparkly jacket, a piece of clothing that for most people might just be a fun fashion choice. But for a 10-year-old named Oliver, it was something far more significant. This jacket wasn't just about style, it was about expression, courage, and the desire to be exactly who he wanted to be, regardless of what anyone else thought. But being different isn't easy. And in Oliver's case, his jacket would become the focal point of a battle not just against bullies, but against the expectations of the world around him. Oliver lived in a quiet suburb in the West Midlands, a place that seemed to echo the nostalgia of small-town communities, where everyone knew each other, and the idea of fitting in was crucial. From the time Oliver could dress himself, he always gravitated toward things that stood out: bright colors, quirky patterns, and glitter. When he saw the pink, sparkly jacket at a thrift store, his eyes lit up, and he convinced his dad to buy it for him. It wasn't just a jacket, it was a symbol of his personality: vibrant, unafraid, and unapologetically unique. Oliver's dad, Jack, was a single father who had always done his best to make Oliver feel loved and supported. Jack had his own fears about the challenges Oliver might face being so visibly different. But he believed that it was more important for Oliver to be himself than to conform to the expectations of others. Jack had been a witness to Oliver's creativity since his early childhood. Whether it was making colorful drawings or constructing elaborate Lego worlds, Oliver brought a certain spark to everything he did. And so, Jack bought the jacket, knowing full well that it would bring both joy and challenges into their lives. The challenges started soon enough. It was during a cousin's birthday party when Oliver wore the jacket in public for the first time. He was thrilled, twirling around in it, showing off the sparkles as they caught the light. Jack watched with pride as Oliver's joy radiated through the crowd. But then the whispers started. Some of the other kids snickered, and one boy pointed at Oliver, laughing loudly. "You look so gay." The boy sneered, and the other kids joined in the teasing. Jack's heart sank. He stepped in, forcing the kids to apologize. But the damage was done. Oliver's smile faded, replaced by confusion and hurt. That night, Jack found himself lying awake, thinking about what had happened. He couldn't help but question if he was doing the right thing. Was he setting Oliver up for a childhood filled with pain and loneliness? He didn't want Oliver to have to deal with bullying, to feel excluded or ridiculed just because he chose to wear what he loved. He knew he had to make a decision, one that would impact not just how Oliver saw himself, but also how he would deal with the world around him. Jack eventually sat Oliver down for a heart-to-heart conversation. He started by telling Oliver how proud he was of him, how he admired his courage and his creativity. He explained that not everyone would understand his choices, and that some people might be mean because they were scared of things that were different. Jack wanted Oliver to understand that there might be tough times ahead. But that didn't mean he had to change who he was. They talked about the bullying, and Jack asked Oliver if he wanted to keep wearing the jacket, or if he wanted to tone things down to avoid attention. Oliver looked at his dad with determination in his eyes. He loved that jacket. It made him feel like himself. He didn't want to hide who he was, but he also didn't want to feel sad every time someone made fun of him. Jack understood, and together they came up with a plan. They spent the rest of the summer coming up with witty comebacks to the kind of teasing Oliver might face. Jack taught Oliver how to stay confident, how to laugh things off, and, most importantly, how to recognize when someone's words weren't worth his time or energy. When the new school year started, Jack was anxious. He knew how cruel kids could be, but he also knew that Oliver was ready, or as ready as he could be. On the first day, Oliver insisted on wearing his pink, sparkly jacket. Jack didn't stop him. He hugged Oliver before he walked into the school building, telling him to stay brave and reminding him that he was loved, no matter what. The first few days were tough. Oliver faced stares and whispers. There were a few kids who made fun of him, but this time, Oliver was ready. He fired back with the comebacks he had practiced with his dad. And to his surprise, some of the kids actually laughed, not at him, but with him. Slowly, the taunts became less frequent. Some of the other children even started to compliment his jacket, telling him how cool it was. It wasn't long before Oliver made his first friend at the new school, a boy named Sam. Sam was different too, in his own way. He was quieter, liked to draw, and didn't have many friends either. He admired Oliver's bravery, and soon they became inseparable. They spent their lunch breaks drawing comics together, creating stories about superheroes who didn't wear capes but instead wore sparkly jackets and rainbow sneakers. For the first time in a long time, Oliver felt like he truly belonged. One day, Sam invited Oliver over to his house, and Oliver decided to wear his favorite jacket. He was a bit nervous about how Sam's family might react, but Jack reassured him, reminding him to be himself. When Oliver showed up in his pink jacket, Sam's mom simply smiled and said, "I love your jacket, Oliver. It suits you." That was all Oliver needed to hear. The two boys played for hours, laughing and creating stories, oblivious to the world outside. Jack watched his son grow more confident each day. He saw Oliver come home from school with a smile, talking excitedly about his day, about his new friend Sam, about the games they played. It was everything Jack had hoped for. He realized that his fears, though valid, were not as powerful as his son's courage. By allowing Oliver to be himself, Jack had given him the space to find his own way, to navigate the challenges of being different, and to discover the beauty in standing out. There were still tough days, days when someone would make a snide comment, or when Oliver would come home feeling a bit down. But Jack was always there, ready to listen, to encourage, and to remind Oliver of how amazing he was. They talked openly about the challenges, about how sometimes people could be mean simply because they didn't understand. Jack made sure that Oliver knew that he was never alone, that he had a dad who loved him and a friend who had his back. Oliver's story is a testament to the power of being yourself, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. It's about finding the courage to wear that pink, sparkly jacket, to stand out in a crowd, and to know that who you are is enough. In the end, it wasn't about the jacket at all. It was about the light that shone from within Oliver. A light that no amount of bullying could ever dim. And for Jack, it was about learning that the best way to protect his son wasn't to shield him from the world, but to help him face it, head on, with love and unwavering support. After confronting my husband's friend about pressuring his sick fiancé into having kids, I questioned if I overstepped or just told the truth. Imagine being in a room filled with your closest friends, introducing your precious newborn to people who are practically family. Everyone is smiling, cooing over the baby, sharing the warmth and joy of a new life. Suddenly, the conversation turns, and an old friend says something so shocking and insensitive that the entire room goes silent. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath. This is a story about standing up when it seems like no one else will. It's about the uncomfortable, necessary confrontation that exposes deep-seated control and selfishness, making everyone reconsider the roles we all play in each other's lives. Let me take you into the life of our protagonist, a 32-year-old woman we'll call Emily. Emily is married to Mark, a loving husband who has a long-standing friendship with a man named John, the quintessential high school jock. John is charming, athletic, and undeniably popular, the kind of guy who never really let go of his glory days. On the surface, John seems like a nice guy, but Emily had always harbored doubts. She'd noticed the offhand comments he made about women, the way he treated his fiancée Janet, and how he consistently put his needs above anyone else's. Emily had often wondered about her husband's loyalty to John. Mark seemed blind to John's flaws, dismissing the questionable behavior as just part of John's personality. Over the years, John had never really grown up. He was still the guy who saw women as conquests, who took what he wanted without considering the emotional or physical toll on those around him. The story really begins during a casual gathering of friends. Emily, Mark, John, and a few other friends were spending a lovely afternoon together, sharing stories and laughing. Emily had brought her newborn baby Zoff along. The room was warm, full of life and laughter. It was in this relaxed atmosphere that John decided to drop a bombshell. As they were chatting, the topic of children came up. John turned to Emily, his eyes alight, and said confidently that he and Janet would be the next to have a baby. Emily smiled and looked at Janet, hoping to see excitement mirrored in her friend's eyes. But Janet didn't look thrilled, she looked uneasy, as if something heavy had settled on her shoulders. She didn't even get a chance to respond before John cut in, explaining, "We're not getting married until we have a kid. It's just how we decided." Emily felt her stomach tighten. She knew Janet's situation well. Janet was dealing with a difficult medical condition that left her feeling exhausted most days. Sometimes she struggled just to get out of bed. Recently, she had lost her father, adding an emotional burden to an already overwhelming physical one. And then there was the matter of distance. Janet and Emily had both moved to a new country, leaving their family and main support systems behind. Janet had no one but John to lean on, and he didn't seem to be shouldering that responsibility well. Emily couldn't stay silent. She asked Janet gently, "Is that really what you want, having a baby now? Before the wedding?" Janet barely opened her mouth before John interrupted. "We agreed. It's better to do it now, while her biological clock is still ticking. We don't have time to waste." Emily felt a surge of anger rising in her chest. She glanced at Janet, who looked even more downtrodden than before, her eyes fixed on the floor. It was clear she didn't feel comfortable with what was being discussed. Emily couldn't let this slide. She knew the risks. Speaking up could create tension, cause friction among friends, or worse. But she also knew she couldn't sit there while John pushed Janet into something that could harm her. "John," Emily began, her voice sharp enough to cut through the jovial atmosphere. "It doesn't sound like this is the best plan for Janet's health right now. Are you really thinking about what's best for her? Or just about what you want?" The room fell silent. Everyone shifted in their seats, the air suddenly thick with discomfort. John stared at Emily, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "I'm thinking about our future," he said, his tone defensive. "If we don't do it now, we might never get the chance." Emily could feel her pulse quickening. "But what about Janet's health? She's still recovering. Having a baby isn't something you can just push through if you're not physically ready. It's not just about biology, it's about her well-being, her ability to handle everything that comes with a pregnancy." John laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You don't understand, Emily. It's now or never." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She could see Mark looking at her, his expression unreadable, but she couldn't stop now. "No, John, what I understand is that this sounds selfish. Janet deserves to make this decision on her own, without pressure. Pushing her like this, it's not love, it's control." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Janet looked up, her eyes wide, tears threatening to spill. John was visibly angry now, his jaw tight. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "This is between me and Janet." Emily met his gaze, refusing to back down. "I know enough to see that she's not okay with this. And that's enough for me." After that, the gathering ended abruptly. Emily and Mark left, the silence between them heavy. Later that night, Mark told Emily that while he understood her intentions, it wasn't her place to say anything. He reminded her that they were John's choices to make, and that she might have crossed a line. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had done the right thing. She remembered her own pregnancy, the difficulty, the pain, the constant exhaustion. She had Mark by her side, supporting her every step of the way. And it was still one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She couldn't imagine going through that without real support, with someone who was more concerned about what he wanted than about her well-being. A few days later, Emily decided to reach out to Janet directly. She invited her out for coffee, wanting to make sure she was okay after everything that had happened. They met at a small cafe, the smell of fresh pastries filling the air as they sat down. Emily took a deep breath and apologized, telling Janet that she should have spoken to her privately first and that she hadn't meant to overstep. To Emily's surprise, Janet smiled sadly. "At first, I was embarrassed," she admitted, "but after thinking about it, I started wondering if you were right. Maybe it really isn't the right time for me. I've actually scheduled an appointment with a specialist to talk about it. John doesn't know. I want to have all the information before I bring it up with him." Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. Janet was thinking about herself, her health, her future, and that was all Emily had wanted for her. But then Janet's expression darkened. "John was furious after we left," she said quietly. "We had a terrible fight. He said I should have defended our decision, that I knew having kids was a must for him. He even said that a woman isn't a real woman unless she gives her man biological children." Emily's heart sank. She wanted to tell Janet that John was wrong, that his words were manipulative and cruel. But she held back, knowing that pushing Janet too hard might only make her retreat. Instead, she listened, nodding, offering support without judgment. Janet went on to say that she had decided to take some time off and visit her mother. She needed space, needed to clear her head away from John and his constant pressure. Emily encouraged her, telling her that taking time for herself was the right choice, that she deserved to feel safe and cared for. As Janet spoke, tears began to fill her eyes. "I'm just scared," she confessed. "I've always felt like someone like me could never get a guy like John. It's like I found a golden ticket. And now I'm terrified of losing it." Emily's heart ached for her friend. She could see the depth of Janet's insecurities. How deeply she believed that she wasn't worthy of real, unconditional love. But again, Emily held her tongue, knowing that this was Janet's journey to navigate. She could only be there to support her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Emily tried to talk to Mark about what had happened, about how he still seemed to idolize John despite his behavior. But Mark remained stubborn, unwilling to see his old friend in a different light. It was frustrating, but Emily knew that she couldn't force him to change his perspective. All she could do was stand by her own values and continue to support Janet. It's worth pausing here to think about the dynamics at play. John represents a kind of behavior that's often romanticized in media, the charming, assertive man who knows what he wants and takes charge. But what's often overlooked is how easily that kind of attitude can slip into something darker, something controlling. John's insistence on having children before marriage, his dismissive attitude towards Janet's health, and his belief that her worth as a woman is tied to her ability to bear children. These are all red flags that too often get ignored or downplayed. Emily's actions, calling John out in public, pushing Janet to think about her own needs, weren't perfect. They were messy and perhaps poorly timed, but they came from a place of genuine concern. In situations like this, there's rarely a clear right or wrong way to act. Emotions are involved, loyalties are tested, and the lines between support and interference blur easily. Janet's struggle is one that many people face: the fear of losing someone who they believe is out of their league. The worry that they'll never find another partner who will love them. It's a toxic cycle that keeps people in unhealthy relationships, preventing them from seeing their own worth outside of the person they're with. By the end of this part of the story, we see that Janet is beginning to take steps to reclaim her autonomy, seeking medical advice without John's knowledge, deciding to spend time away from him to think clearly. These are small but significant moves that indicate a shift in her thinking, a realization that her health and well-being matter just as much as John's desires. The story doesn't end with everything neatly resolved. Emily and Mark are still at odds over John's behavior, and Janet is still struggling with her insecurities. But life is rarely about perfect resolutions. It's about the small victories, the moments when someone like Janet decides to put herself first, even if just for a little while. This story reminds us that sometimes, standing up for someone means risking conflict. It means being willing to make things uncomfortable if it means protecting someone you care about. And sometimes, it means knowing when to step back, to let someone else make their own decisions, even if you don't agree with them. It also highlights the importance of empathy, not just for others, but for ourselves. Emily felt the weight of the confrontation, questioning whether she had done the right thing. But her actions came from a place of empathy, from her own experience of a difficult pregnancy and her desire to prevent her friend from suffering unnecessarily. In relationships, whether friendships, romantic partnerships, or even casual acquaintances, the balance between support and control is delicate. John crossed that line, and Emily tried to pull Janet back, even if it wasn't in the most graceful way. Ultimately, it's up to Janet to decide what she wants, to recognize her worth outside of her relationship with John, and to make choices that are best for her own health and happiness. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're watching someone you care about being mistreated, you know how hard it can be to decide whether to step in or stay out of it. There's always the fear of making things worse, of overstepping boundaries. But sometimes, silence can be more harmful than speaking up. Emily's story shows that standing up for what's right isn't always easy. And it certainly isn't always pretty. But it's often necessary. For those who might relate to Janet's experience, feeling like you're not worthy of love, believing that you have to do whatever it takes to keep someone from leaving, know that your worth isn't tied to anyone else. True love doesn't come with conditions that force you to sacrifice your health or well-being. It's about mutual respect, care, and support. And for those who might identify a bit too closely with John, it's important to take a step back and consider how your actions affect your partner. Loving someone means putting their needs on equal footing with your own. Not dismissing their concerns or pressuring them into decisions that make them uncomfortable. Ultimately, this story is a reminder that love and friendship are about more than just the good times. They're about being there for each other when things are difficult. About being willing to have the tough conversations. And about respecting each other's boundaries, even when it's uncomfortable.